Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm Bore da to you all. Obviously, I can't see everybody, and you can't speak to me at the moment, but a little thumbs up just to say you can hear me okay. Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you. So my name's Anthony McBride from Trachea. Myself and some of the team were delighted to meet some of you last week in Llandudno at the National Education Show. It was a great event. One thing that did come up in a couple of conversations was, how does a company in Doncaster come to support schools right across Wales with progress data? And it is a good question. I suppose to compound matters a little further, you're listening to an Irishman with a Yorkshire accent here. But I think I'll answer that question as by way of a little introduction, and that will give you a little bit of context and background as to who we are. So in a moment, I'm going to pass you over to Steve Howse, our resident data guru. And Steve and I were both former leaders in school, but we taught together for many years. And one thing that we really did always agree upon was that data should only be used in school if it was actually there to improve the experience and the outcome of the pupils. And even more than that, it should also make our jobs as educators easier. Personally, as a teacher, I was very much of the mindset, just give me the data that I need in a really simple, user-friendly format, and I will then use that to inform the teaching and learning in my classroom. So that really has become the mantra at Trachea. So nearly 10 years since Steve and I worked, 10 years ago since Steve and I worked together, the SMID report is now very, very well established in England and Wales in the secondary school sector. We are incredibly proud to support over half of the secondary schools in Wales. And it's from those relationships really that Trachea was born. I'm mindful that we've got colleagues from right across the spectrum of education, all kinds of roles. Indeed, we've got colleagues from the primary and the secondary school data sector as well. And our hope is today that whatever your role is in school, you will take something away that will be beneficial. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Steve, and I'm pretty sure he's going to use the Trachea platform to help illustrate our vision of assessment data and how that can strengthen your transition to the new curriculum. Before I do that, though, just a couple of housekeeping points. Clearly, would absolutely love to hear all of your thoughts, your questions and suggestions today. But given the numbers involved, the most practical way we've decided of doing that is via a really short form that we're going to send you straight after the webinar. Okay, so we'll email you that across. We're going to record this session as well at the request of colleagues that can't be with us. So we'll send you the recording as well. There might be some helpful tidbits in there. So I'm now going to hand over to Steve, if he's there. Thank you, Steve.
Hi everyone, brilliant. Thanks for that, Anthony. Hoping everyone can hear me fine. Just to give you a bit of a clarity on what we're planning on, what we're doing here basically, and that what we've done is over the last few years, we've worked with schools that are putting in the new Welsh curriculum, obviously into their schools, some of the early adopters and some of the people that are, just obviously people are building upon it now. We've also worked with schools in England 3 or 4 years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago now, who were doing the Life After Levels, which was a similar sort of system where it's not that there's not so much structure in terms of how to assess. There was no kind of like direction given on it, if that makes sense. So today, what I'm really going to do is focus on the fact that I've worked with lots of different schools, loads of really clever ideas that have come up, and I'm just going to kind of like give you sort of like an overview of what people are doing to try and come up with their assessment models, the sort of things that people might be wanting to use, and then also just having a little look about how to make it accessible and how to actually track it and how to find out progress and things like that. So the first thing I'd say is I'm going to look at basically four different things. So what are you going to track? How are you going to track it? progress, and then how to get staff involved. And obviously, like Anthony says, a range of staff here, but hopefully this will be really useful in terms of how to get everyone on the same page. So I will just say, I'm not going to go, here's the answer to how to track within the new Welsh curriculum for Wales, because that's not the answer I've got. I'm just saying, here are some great ideas. And I think the first thing I'm going to say is that this is all about flexibility. It's all about doing what's right for your school and what's right for your curriculum. I think lots of schools are already fairly comfortable with the fact they've redesigned their curriculum. You know what I mean? They've been able to make up their own mind on what they teach when, how they approach different tasks, how they approach progress, that kind of thing. In terms of the curriculum design, I think that people are maybe less clear on the assessment. So that's sort of why we're here today, because obviously deciding what to assess, you don't want someone coming in and saying, well, you're missing this whole chunk of assessment. So it's like, how do you decide what you've got to assess and how do you assess it? I think are two massive questions. First of all, just to be clear, I'm focusing today massively on summative assessment and less on the kind of formative assessment. So obviously everyone's going to be still assessing by, your assessment for learning and lessons, your marking, all of the usual things that everyone already does and will have done for years. That's no different. Obviously, that has to be built into your curriculum and your planning and so on. But that's not what I'm looking at today. I'm looking here at how do you overarchingly assess progress in a sort of data way, if that makes sense. I think that if you can try and turn this on your head, try and turn it on its head and look at this as a real positive, because it allows you as a school to come up and be a lot more flexible and actually target the areas that your students need. And I think that's something that the problem with data in schools, the problem with having lots of data, is that it's not it's seen as like a kind of a burdensome task. It's a task that you have to do. You therefore collect this data, you store it in some file somewhere. Sometimes you show it to governors, you show it to Weston, you maybe show it to like the odd person that comes in to check on your school, but you don't necessarily actually like use it thoroughly. And a lot of the time that's because it's data that you've been told you have to collect, and it's not necessarily absolutely relevant to your school. An example of this is I went into a school the other day that was looking at I was just looking at data, and they had like free school meals data, a whole section on it, and it was like 50% of free school meal students are achieving this or something, and it was all 50% or 0 or 100. And then we realized it's because there's only 2 free school meal students. And I think this is a kind of a good example of where not people are having to present and collect data that isn't necessarily massively relevant to their school, if that makes sense. So I think that it's really important here that you as a school are going to have the opportunity to now to go, okay, literacy is our massive issue, numeracy less so. So let's have a real focus on literacy. It could be reading or writing. It could be that you really want to look at the well-being of students, so you're going to track well-being data. It could be that attendance is 97% of your school, so that's not very interesting, whereas at another school it's 91%, so you want to really focus on that. There's loads of different reasons why you might want to focus on different areas that are relevant to your school, and a lot of this comes down to the curriculum alignment. And this again is it's a statement that's been made that's must align to the curriculum, but realistically you must align to what your school needs. And I think that's really, really, really key. So if you're going to collect it, if you're going to measure it, you need to make sure it's relevant to your school. So on that situation, on that statement, I'm going to have a look at what are you going to track. So we're just going to all the way through this. As Anthony said, I'm going to use just the track here dashboard, just because it's nice and easy for me to show you what I mean. But basically, there's loads of opportunities here to what you're going to track. So you could track on the AOLE descriptors. I think that's not a particularly good idea, mainly because there are thousands of them. I did actually create a file, so I'm actually just going to quickly show you an Excel file that I created just to show how crazy this is. These are all the AOLE learning descriptors, every single one of them. And admittedly, some of them might not be relevant in an early setting of a primary school, but all of them are in there. And if you were to take a class of 30 students and then track as to whether they were meeting those descriptors or not, you end up with a nice table that's got 28,246 different pieces of data in it. So as you can see, that would be a far too large section of data to collect. So I think this idea of going down and saying this learning descriptor, does the student know it? Yes, no, all the way down, or even working out, working towards, working below, all of that kind of thing on all of these descriptors just does not work. It's just too much data. And that's a big thing I'm going to focus on here. It's like, if you collect too much data, it becomes completely useless and it's completely wasting staff time. So a really important thing here is that, obviously it'd be great if you were doing one-to-one with a student, you might do something like that. You might want to know all the little different bits that they know and don't know, and therefore you could do a really fine-grained analysis. But if you were to do it for a class of 30s, you can see it's just a huge amount of data. So most of it irrelevant. So the point here is that you would want to have, when you're coming to tracking, you need to decide what you're going to track, why it aligns with your curriculum, what maybe you're going to track different things, different term. Some things you might want to track once a year, some like well-being, for example. You might do a well-being survey that's once a year and once, or maybe once at the start of the year and once right at the end of the year. Whereas other things like attendance and behavior, you might collect behavior points or something like that. And attention, you might want to do that really regularly because you're looking at something where you're trying to make a change really quickly, if that makes sense, and you'll see a change quickly in itself. So there's loads of options here. You've always been, national tests, well-being, reading age, spelling age, trick or schlick, phonics stuff, all of that. There's loads of different ideas that you could track. Really interested with well-being. That's becoming a lot more obviously something that schools are tracking and wanting to see, does it have an impact? I have seen schools that have used it really effectively when they're comparing things like attendance to a well-being question. Do you know what I mean? So I am confident, all the low attendees much less confident than the high attendees, things like that. Really, really useful things to have a look at, to be able to say, we can put something in place, or we can look at how these two aspects are affecting each other. So again, it's all about what are you wanting to track at your school of what fits with your curriculum. And I think I'm not one for creating loads of documents. I think there's far too many documents and policies and things like that. But the point here is when you're deciding on this, when you're building your SIP or your SEF or whatever, when you're creating that, you want to come up with the things you're going to track. Why are you going to track them? Why are you not tracking something else? And then how are you going to use it so that it has impact? And this is something that we've really focused on when we built the SMID report and now Trickier. We've really, really focused on, it's all about using that data so that it has an impact. And I think that's really, really important. So many schools, you're collecting data, but it doesn't have an impact. So schools have done this for years, and I just sort of compare it to people I know that work in other industry areas. Like I've got a friend that works as data analytics within Tesco, and they collect data. And the idea that they only collect data because they want to put it in a situation where they're going to use it. And obviously they use that information to make decisions and they use it to make changes and so on. And I think it would be very odd if you said to him, oh, why are you collecting that data? Well, we just keep in a file and bring it out every now and again to show a few people. And I think that's the key here, is to have data that you're really, really going to use and that is really going to have an impact in your school. So that's the first sort of really core area, is how are you going to use it. The second bit I want to look at is sorry, that was how are we going to use it is the next bit I want to look at. So in terms of what I mean by this is, how are you measuring all of these things? So there's obvious things like attendance are obviously measured in a kind of percentage structure, but you can measure things in all sorts of different ways. And that's partly why the tracker is built like this, so that you can build up any form of system that you want to measure. If you can measure it, then you can organize it. But the idea here is that it's really, really important to identify when you're measuring, when you're coming up with how you're going to measure it, to really understand what it means that the score system that you're creating means. And I think that this is something where we're in a position where people are sort of saying, it's after levels, it's not about levels. But obviously there are still levels. It's just the fact that they've got to have a meaning. So it's like with the learning descriptors are a good example. Like realistically, they're level P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, the progress steps. They're all levels. They've just got descriptors. The point is that they are no longer officially age related. So originally you would have a student should be a 4A at this age or a 4B at this age. That is their expected standard. Nowadays, they're far, even though the P1, P2, it sort of has a rough age guide, it doesn't have, it's not explicit that the student has to be at that age. It's much more, we want to see progress. We want to see the students progressing as they go through the school, and we want to be able to evidence that. So when it comes to assigning a level or a score or a grade or however you want to define it, it's really important that you explain what each of those levels mean and that someone understands it. And that's why when it comes to developing score systems, it's really important that you have a focus on what the levels mean. So, and not making it too complicated. I've been into schools where they have like a 1 to 50 score system for something, whatever it might be. And you could say, well, what's the difference between 25 and 26? And no one can really officially tell you. They can just say 26 is better than 25. Do you know what I mean? So what we're doing here is we when we create that score system, we need to be able to say, right, what does each level mean? If, for example, take this behavior here, outstanding, good, requires improvement, concern. If I'm going to assess on that, if I'm going to be looking at behavior, what is actually meant by that? What is meant by each level? For me down here, I created like an AOLE scheme. I don't particularly like this method, but like what does a P3 working at in a certain subject mean? And that's obviously where those learning descriptors come in. But the whole point here is it needs to have substance behind it, so that if you are a teacher, you can give someone a level easily. That's really important. You don't want a teacher having to think for ages and ages about what level they're at. You want to be able to do it easily. You then want the level to have full meaning so you can see what progress the student's making. Just to take the other end of the spectrum with the complicated one, you could have a very simple score system. This might be really useful for something, A, B, C. You know what I mean? If you've got something where you've just got 3 levels, but in the majority of situations, that's not a particularly good score system because everyone wants to pick the middle option if they're not sure. Unless you've absolutely categorically defined what C, B, and A mean. It also means that you struggle to show any progress. So how do you show progress? Well, the student starts off at C, they then go to B, then go to A. Well, where do they go then? It's the same principle. It's about having something where you have enough detail to show progress, and you have enough knowledge behind each of the levels to be sure about where that student is. So I think this is really important. So when you're coming to develop your own internal score system, whether you have like a focus from the, obviously you can focus the background of an AOLE, and then you can create a learning descriptor around what a certain level that you have means. And then that allows you to track progress as you go along from, one data capture to the next to be able to see how the student's improving. But it might be that you just take a literacy focus and it's as simple as saying, a 1 to 10, 10 means this, 9 means this, 8 means this, 7 means this, defining all those really clear. The teacher understands what they mean, and then you can move on. I've done that here with, I've got like a 1 to 10 well-being score system, and obviously I would need to just define what each of those levels mean so that teachers can be really confident about how the student's progressing, if that makes sense. When the other side of things here is that you've got to be able to make this as useful as possible. And one of the things here is like, I'm really, Anthony will say this, it's more than me. I was a physics teacher, so this is a little bit less true for me, but the teachers do not become teachers because they're good at Excel. That's not why teachers want to do it. They're not good at Excel necessarily. They don't want to be looking at data all the time. So the real thing here is to not have a situation where it's really important that teachers are really understanding the stats and the things behind it. So what I'm suggesting here is that when you're doing this sort of thing, you need to have like things that are just like colorful. You know what I mean? If it's blue, if it's green, it's orange, it's red, you can say, we're just trying to get them into the blue group. Students need to be in the green group, that kind of thing. And it makes the data a lot easier to use, as I just show here. So this is like really simple charts that are created about students. So I've got my attendance summary there, really easy to use. I can see, like who are the low attendees, who are the high attendees. I can see that information. I've got some, national tests here. Who are the low performers. I've got a well-being survey, same principle. Who are the people that aren't fit? Who, a question I am confident. Who are the ones that aren't confident? And that comes even more into the front when you're looking at things like pie charts, and you want to see who are what do the different sections mean. So if I want to look at the well-being survey and I click on I am confident, I can see who the students are. I can see the red. That stands out to me. I don't need to know anything about the scores. When you're trying to engage staff, this is really important. I click on a student here and I can just say, okay, that's my area that the student's concerned about, that they're not confident, So the attendance is fine if I've got a green score on there, but what the 92 is, but that's just where I put my boundary. But you can see there I've got the 127 there. It's all coming up green. It's really, really obvious. And I think that's really important, that you create a system where it's color coded. You can really, really easily see, how students are performing without having to know anything, without having to go, I need to know loads about this data. This makes it so accessible. This means that the person who is just started out as a learning support assistant can come into the classroom, be given access to some data, and they can look at it and go, okay, I can really see where I'm going to go and help the student. When I'm doing the one-to-one, I can see that I'm helping them, and I'm going to look at this little area with them. It's really important that they have that simplicity to the information. It's not being patronizing to people. It's people don't come in to be teachers thinking it's going to be great. I'm going to sit by my laptop and have a look at Excel all day. So I think that's really, really important when it comes to creating a really good system for people to work from. What I'm going to move on to next is I'm going to look at how we look at progress. So this is basically my third topic. So there's a couple of things with progress, and I'm not going to get into too much detail and try not to be too boring about it. But when it comes to progress, it's obviously the most important thing. You want to see our students moving forward from one data capture or one time that you collect data to the next. Are they making progress? And I think this is a really good question. The thing that gets missed in this is that you really do have to take it a little bit further than just looking at one data capture next. And I'll sort of just show you why using these a couple of examples. So you could be measuring anything. Again, it's all about progress. I've got a reading age set up here. So this is like looking at reading age, seeing, who's progressed, how many months have they improved, this student's gone up and this student's gone down and so on. Really, really useful information, and I can see where were they at before and where are they at now and so on. And that's all great. So I can see the progress that students are making. I might be looking at progress reading age. I might be looking at this trick or slick. This is just stuff I've put in. You could look at anything on here. You know what I mean? That's up to you. And again, that's what I'm saying. It's about you picking what you want to look at and how you want to analyze it. But I've just set this up for my example. The thing that you miss a little bit if you just do this, if you just do one data capture next, is you miss students that oscillate. And this is something that we've really noticed that when we've developed systems for the last few years, is the amount of schools that say to us, we never noticed that John Smith went from a high grade to a low grade to a high grade to a low grade to a high grade to a low grade. And every term we go, oh, he needs to have some support because he's gone down. And then he goes, oh, he's doing really well because he's gone back up. And actually he never ended up any better than he was at the start of the year or something like that, but along those lines. And I think this is really, really key. And this is why you don't just want to although looking at progress like that is fantastic. It's really, really useful. Again, same principle. Anyone can look at that chart and see who needs support. I think that's pretty obvious. But the other side of things is to look at progress over time. So if I want to look at it, like this is just, I think this is just a national test score. So if I'm, again, all completely made up, but this is just, I can see as an average, this class is going up, which is great. But if I go and look at the individual students and I look at their scores, take this second line of student, I can see they've gone from high to quite middle to high to quite middle, back to fairly high again. And so as we go through the year, I'd be looking at this student thinking, oh my goodness, needs some support, doing fantastically well. Oh my goodness, needs some support, doing fantastically well. Whereas actually at the end, they're still lower than they were where they were at the start. Bit of a fake example. I appreciate national test figures shouldn't be jumping around quite that much, but you get the principle, hopefully, of that. The idea is that, you do get a lot of students that are like this, that is not picked up, that they just simply go up a little bit and down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. And if you're not tracking their progress across multiple data captures, they get missed. And in the end, that's our real focus. That's our real focus here, is to pick up on the students that we don't naturally pick up on. You pick up on a lot of how the students performing just from the fact that you're in the classroom with them every day. This is just there to try and like help you pick up on bits that you might miss when you're not there. Well, when you're not, that you might not pick up on over a long period of time, if that makes sense. I will say one last thing on progress. So I'm very positive about progress, just to be clear, because I sort of said a couple of negative things. I'm very positive about that. Is what you should be looking at. You want to see students make progress. You want to make, the more you can say these students are all making progress, the better. The more you can support students that aren't making progress, that fantastic. And it's all about going, that student isn't making progress quick enough, and so on. But one of the things that I will just say is, careful of like whole class averages or whole school averages. This is where things fall down. I'll just explain this from just using an English example that happened 5 or 6 years ago. There was a massive push on levels of progress. So this was it was for secondary. So primary schools used it as well, but the problem occurred really at secondary. So the students came in. One would come in with a level 2, one would come in with a level 5, and you would expect the school or the government or the DfE said everyone should make 3 levels of progress. Everyone should make 3 levels of progress, and that's fair. That's fair to any classroom teacher. You teach set 5, you teach set 1, doesn't matter. 3 levels of progress. I'm not asking you to do anything different. And it felt fair. It felt really fair that everyone, a teacher, or even better, a whole school with a school that got 98% A star to C and a school that got 20% A star to C, we're now going to be judged on levels of progress. So we would expect them to make the same progress because it's 3 levels of progress. Everyone's equal. The problem here is that no one looked at the fact that if a student went all the way through primary school and made 2 levels of progress, and another student went all the way through primary school and made 5 levels of progress, the student with 2 levels now making a further 3 was massive, whereas the student that had made 5 levels now making a further 3 was an absolute doddle. So any school that had high ability students coming in made 3 or 4 levels of progress. Any student at school that had low ability students coming in made 2 or 3 levels of progress. So even though it sounded fair, because we're talking about progress, it sounded fair, it sounded like it was all equal, it definitely wasn't. And this showed out immediately. And it took about a typical within organizations like the DfE and others, it took about 5 years for anyone to really pick it up properly. But for a long time, people would judge on this, and you'd sort of have like, well, why is our set 5 teacher making so much little progress compared to our set 1? It sounds really obvious when it's explained, but at the start, people didn't pick up on the fact that it wasn't fair saying a low ability student should still make 3 levels as a high ability. And I think that's really important when it comes to progress. You shouldn't necessarily see the same amount of progress by every student. And there's obviously thousands of reasons for that aren't ability, where focus on ability, but you shouldn't see it anyway because of the ability of the student. The ability of the student to actually make progress is part of the reason why they have a certain academic ability. So I think that's hopefully I've explained that clear enough, because I do realize that that's quite a technical explanation, but hopefully that makes sense. So when it's coming to progress, it's really important to keep in mind that you won't expect everyone to make the same amount of progress. And obviously everyone already knows progress isn't linear. Some people make it really quickly, some people jump about, some people do all sorts. Brilliant. So that's everything I want to say about progress. The last thing I want to talk about, when it comes to this data, as we've said, you're collecting this data. See, let's just be clear. You're wasting the student's time. You're wasting the teacher's time. You're collecting it to do this manual task of collecting the data. So if you're going to take that time, you have to make sure that you're going to use it. And I think that's really, really, really important. I cannot stress that enough. And that's why what I would say with the accessibility is that it's really important that all staff, for one, have access to the data. It's really important that they understand how to use it. It's then really important that it's simple so that it can be used. And by simple, I don't mean patronizingly simple, but I just mean that if you make things colorful and it makes it a lot easier to use, it's a lot quicker. I can see straight away looking at these tables exactly where there's areas of focus, where there's areas of strength. So it's all about making it accessible. But one of the big things here, and this is where Tracera is very powerful, is it's all about having it all in one place. And because it's all in one place and it's on the cloud, internet, whatever you want to say, it means that you can access this from anywhere. So if you're planning a lesson at home and you're wanting to look at, you wanting to incorporate some data into that, do you know what I mean? So you want to look at who you might need to make extra support for, or something like that on a certain topic, then you can access the data straight away. If you're about to do a one-to-one session with someone in school, then you want to be able to get onto a system where you can see the area that you might want to focus on. All of this is about using that data. If you're just going to collect it and put it in a file, then I would just say don't collect any data, because it's basically pointless. Just collect the stuff that you're going to use. And then from here, the great thing about Tracera is it's all in one place. And that means that therefore you can look at how one thing compares against another. So here I'm looking at how the national test, the Welsh strand of the national test compared to attendance. So I can see, like certain people with like low attendance have had like lower performing scores in the test, and they can see like the big core effect down here of these students, or down here of these students of low attendance, and I can see how it affects their age standardized score. So I think things like this are really, really helpful when you're looking at like who do we need to really focus on, who do we really need to focus on, where if we get their attendance up, it's going to really affect their performance. The same applies to something here. I've just plotted attendance versus well-being. So I can see like the students here, low attendance, low well-being. These students, it's like low, don't feel confident. So, possibly low attendance having an effect on that. It's really, really interesting what schools do. It's like I've just plotted two random things against each other there because to be perfectly honest, they just cropped up for me. But you could plot anything against each other here. So you could be looking at how does certain aspect within school affect another certain aspect within school, and using that correlation, being able to plot those correlations, it really does help you be able to pick certain things out that you want, certain students you want to work with, certain percentages. All my free school meal students that are all doing X, Y, and Z. Loads of people have found out great things about attendance and stuff, like certain times a year sees a real drop in attendance, but therefore it also sees a real drop in their performance. There's all kind of things like that people have noticed through using these sort of platforms, and it does actually mean that you can make a change to the actual curriculum based on the data. And so that's something where when it becomes accessible and easy to use, really, really important. When it becomes like that, it means that all staff get involved. And when you start to have all staff involved, people start to value the time it takes to use the data. If the students can see that they're doing an assessment and then you're actually making a change based on the assessment or something like that, different levels, different ages of students here, but then it doesn't feel so bad doing the assessment, doing the survey, whatever it might be. All of these things are important. Taking that time to use the information, if you're going to collect it to make a change, is obviously going to make a massive difference within school. So realistically there, I'm just going to quickly summarize. So I've covered sort of 4 areas. The first thing is about what do you want to assess. That's, again, going back to that, really important. Align it with your curriculum. Whatever you've planned, however you've structured it, align it so it's with that. Make sure it's something that you want to assess. Don't just assess it because the school down the road is, or someone told you to. You assess it because it's actually going to make a difference to the students in your school. How are you going to assess it? Make sure everyone's really clear. Everyone understands what a grade means. Like obviously things like reading age and stuff like that, they all naturally come through from, where you assess it. But if it's something internal like a well-being, what does it mean to be at a certain level? That's really important. Make sure everyone understands that. Progress, use progress, look at progress consistently. That's what you want to be looking at. Just be careful that you're not saying something like, oh, hang on a minute, that class has made that much progress and this class has made this much progress, so something's obviously going on there, because that isn't always correct. Even though you might say, well, hang on, they've only got to make progress, they've only got to go from point X to point Y, and this one's only got halfway there. You need to actually look at the class and say, are they lower ability? If they're lower ability, then they will find it harder to make the same amount of progress, even though you're saying they've got two different starting points. It does matter. That's really, really important. And the last thing, just said it, but make it accessible, make it useful, make sure it's data that's really relevant. Stats are basically irrelevant. 47% of free school meals achieving X. It doesn't mean anything. It's not useful. Far more useful is to be able to click on it and say, let's have a look at, who are the 53% that aren't? Who are those students? What are the areas that are struggling? Keep it relevant. Make sure it's something that you can go and look at and you can see really, really easily so that it's accessible. That's everything for me, Anthony. So I'm going to pass it back to you if that's okay.
Great, Steve. Thank you for that. So there, guys, you have a little insight really into what we believe represents best practice in tracking progress within the new curriculum. And Trackia is, of course, it is very, very new, but already there's a growing number of schools enjoying the benefits of the platform. Particularly, I think, the flexibility it gives them to focus on the areas of the new curriculum that are relevant to their priorities as a school. I think for me, though, personally, the biggest strength of Trackia is the exceptional support that comes with it. We really, really do pride ourselves on the relationships that we build with schools. And we've got a dedicated support team led by the brilliant Colette. I know she's bursting to say hello to you all in a moment. So she's going to just spend a couple of minutes, I think, taking you through some of the practicalities of what her and the team do. Again, I'm sure Colette will back me up in this. If any of you guys would like to trial Trackia for your school, see what your data looks like in context, then just let us know via the link that we'll provide later. If you're a secondary school, again, you could talk to us about trialing the SMID report. So if it's okay, Colette, I'll hand over for you for a minute or two.
Thanks, Anthony. Hello, everyone. I'm Colette. I'm the customer care and support leader for Trackia. So as you've been seeing through the webinar, as Steve's been showing you, the platform Trackia, what we believe is a great platform to have all your data in one place, which, as you were hearing, Steve, through the webinar, that's a key aspect to have, rather than having all your data just scattered everywhere in different files and like different Excel sheets. It's much nicer just to have everything in one place, which is what Trackia does for you. The dashboard is flexible, so whatever it is that you're collecting in school, like so for example your well-being data, your national test, anything that is specific with your schools, like can appreciate different schools do like measure and track like different types of results, as well as like collectively all together as well. If the big thing is we just say is like if you can measure it, you can track it on the system. So if you were to say, if you were interested in trialing the product, if you were interested in trialing Trackia in your school, we do offer a 3-week free trial. This is so we can just get your school set up. You'll be able to have access to the dashboard. You'll be able to send over your results data to us, to myself and the support team. We can then build your dashboard together, and so you can see basically your data in action, and you can see what the dashboard can do for you and how it can help you tracking the progress for the pupils and stuff. So to begin with, if you were interested in the trial, we do set up your school. We do sync with your MIS. For this, we use group calls. So this is just to keep all the pupil information up to date. We sync through your pupil UPNs, forename, surname, form groups, any pupil groups that they're attached to, as well as your staff email addresses, so we can create accounts for them, so everyone in your school can have access to whoever needs access to the system. The great thing about Trackia is that we're always receiving positive feedback from our current customers, as well as like schools who are currently trialing the product as well. And we do try and accommodate users' requests to help, like with the help of our development team. So the dashboard is built for your school needs, and we're always thinking outside the box and always thinking of different features that we can add onto the platform to advance it. So for example, as you saw earlier in the webinar, how you had that nice pupil profile that has all the, if you was just looking at a specific pupil, you just have all their results there. You can see their pupil groups if they're attached to any and stuff. We're thinking of looking into creating like a comments section. So if you wanted to add like a little comment about a pupil, so for example, John Smith is distracted in maths, add on there, and then all your staff members will be able to view these comments, and you can add any additional comments to that as well. We're also looking into adding like a toggle switch on the dashboard, so we can switch from like the English to the Welsh language, which will be beneficial for yourselves as well as us. As we've noticed, we've been creating the dashboards for schools and stuff, we have been learning the Welsh language as we're going through this, which has been great. So yeah. Lastly, I just want to touch on about how we are planning and organising a training session focusing just on trachea and how you can use the system. So how to like import your results yourselves, but as well, you don't have to import those. You can, you can send it to myself and the support team. We'd be happy to do that for you. And just basically just focusing just on trachea and how you can use it. So we will be sending out more information about that, like the dates and times of when we'll be setting this up. And that's pretty much from me. All I want to just say is if you are interested, feel free to get in touch. The details are on screen. And yeah, I'll pass you back on to Anthony. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Colette. I'm sure that colleagues that are already using the platform will back me up in saying that Colette and the team, that they're phenomenal, they're brilliant. Thank you for that. Folks, we're almost finished. We are mindful that today's session hasn't been interactive at all, and from your perspective, given the nature of the topic and the numbers involved, we've been pretty much talking at you, so apologies for that. We hope though that you have gained something tangible of benefit today that you can take away, even if that's greater clarity and confidence around your data tracking priorities, what they ought to be given your context as a school. So just to reiterate before we leave you, you'll receive an email shortly with the items I mentioned earlier on. Then once we've collated your questions and we've answered them, Colette and the team will put together a PDF document. I think they're planning it will have a planning document that should prove helpful as well, however you decide to move forward. So that will all come together once we've collated and answered the questions. So all that remains to do is for me to thank you all very much for your attendance today, and we hope to actually speak to you in a two-way conversation very, very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.